The astonishing collection of rare agricultural prototypes that Thomas Caldwell discovered beneath his family's century-old brick silo wouldn't just transform his modest Pennsylvania farm, it would uncover an American innovation legacy so significant that it would leave industrial historians and collectors worldwide scrambling to rewrite the textbooks on early 20th century mechanical engineering. What this humble third-generation farmer found hidden beneath decades of rust and forgotten memories wasn't just valuable in dollars and cents. Though experts would later value the collection in the millions, it represented something far more precious: the lost innovations of America's agricultural golden age that history had somehow forgotten. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Caldwell Farm had always been a modest operation compared to the industrial-scale agribusinesses gradually consuming the fertile Allegheny Valley. The imposing brick silo, built by Thomas's great-grandfather Jeremiah in 1918, had become a local landmark in Millfield, its weathered red bricks and rusted metal cap visible for miles across the rolling Pennsylvania countryside. At 62, Thomas had watched the agricultural landscape transform around him with a mixture of pragmatic adaptation and quiet resistance. As neighboring family farms surrendered one by one to corporate agriculture or residential developers, the Caldwell's 150 acres remained stubbornly independent, even as modern methods transformed farming beyond what Jeremiah could have recognized. The silo itself had stood unused for nearly 40 years, its massive cylindrical frame casting long afternoon shadows across fields that had once grown feed corn but now produced specialty organic crops for nearby urban markets. Local stories frequently mention Jeremiah Caldwell's peculiar obsession with the silo's construction, how he'd spent nearly a year gathering specialized materials from across the mid-Atlantic and insisted on personally supervising every aspect of its assembly. The original construction plans had vanished decades ago, and the few surviving photographs from the period showed teams of laborers following Jeremiah's precise instructions, their expressions serious beneath caps and wide-brimmed hats typical of the post-WWI era. What made the silo unique wasn't merely its impressive height or unusual construction methods. It was the inexplicable complexity of its internal structure that had puzzled the family for generations. Unlike standard grain silos of the period, the Caldwell silo featured unusual reinforced sections at its base, mysterious maintenance panels with elaborate latching mechanisms, and a foundation that seemed excessively substantial for a simple grain storage facility. The few contractors who'd examined it over the decades often remarked on its strange internal layout, with sealed compartments and access points that appeared to have no practical agricultural purpose. Thomas's father, Harold, had always dismissed these peculiarities as his grandfather's engineering eccentricities. Jeremiah had reportedly been somewhat of a local inventor himself, but recent events would soon cast these architectural oddities in an entirely new light. The decision to renovate the silo came in September 2023, not from historical interest, but practical necessity. A severe windstorm had damaged the metal cap, and county inspectors had declared the structure potentially unsafe, giving Thomas 6 months to either repair or demolish this piece of family history. Using modern ground scanning equipment borrowed from Daniel's friend at the Pennsylvania State Agricultural University, Thomas detected unusual structural anomalies deep within the silo's foundation. The imaging revealed what appeared to be a large void beneath the concrete floor, a chamber or room that appeared on no existing plans or family records. The scans showed dense metal objects scattered throughout this hidden space, their precise shapes indistinguishable, but their presence undeniable. What truly captured Thomas's attention, however, was the discovery of a leather portfolio found while clearing out an old steamer trunk in the farmhouse attic. The portfolio contained detailed notes and technical drawings in Jeremiah's meticulous handwriting. Most intriguing were recurring references to the Heritage Collection and cryptic mentions of preserving American ingenuity for future generations when the time is right. Several pages appeared to have been deliberately removed, leaving tantalizing fragments of what seemed to be correspondence with prominent industrial figures of the early 20th century. The local historical society had occasionally celebrated the silo as an example of post-WWI agricultural architecture, but the ground-penetrating scans and mysterious portfolio suggested something far more significant lay literally beneath the surface of this familiar landmark. As Thomas began researching his great-grandfather's history beyond the family stories, he uncovered puzzling inconsistencies and unexpected connections. County records revealed that Jeremiah Caldwell hadn't just been a successful farmer. He had maintained correspondence with some of the era's most innovative mechanical engineers and agricultural inventors, though the content of these communications remained frustratingly elusive. Even more curious were the delivery records Thomas discovered among Jeremiah's papers, documenting the arrival of numerous crates and specialized equipment from various manufacturing centers across America. Detroit, Pittsburgh, Chicago, and even as far as San Francisco. The manifests listed mechanical components and materials that seemed unnecessarily sophisticated for a simple grain silo, raising questions about their intended purpose. More puzzling still, some of the equipment descriptions matched prototypes that, according to official records, had never progressed beyond the drawing board. As autumn deepened and repair work on the silo's damaged cap continued, Thomas noticed something strange about the brick pattern near the structure's base. What had always appeared to be a simple design feature, a decorative band of differently colored bricks, now seemed to align perfectly with markings on a faded blueprint from Jeremiah's portfolio. The blueprint contained notations about a primary, access point, and preservation chamber entrance that had previously made little sense. Working with Daniel during his weekend visits from Harrisburg, Thomas carefully examined the area, discovering that certain bricks could be depressed in a specific sequence, creating a mechanism that released what had appeared to be a solid concrete section of the foundation wall. The engineering was remarkable, a century-old security system that had remained functional and undetected through generations of family ownership. What Thomas Caldwell would discover behind that hidden entrance would not only reshape his understanding of his modest family legacy, but would force industrial historians to reconsider everything they thought they knew about America's agricultural innovation history. Little did he know that by Thanksgiving, his quiet Pennsylvania farm would become the focus of national attention, and the contents hidden beneath that old silo would unleash a cascade of revelations that would ripple through museums, universities, and private collections worldwide. The truth about Jeremiah Caldwell's mysterious silo was about to emerge after a century of silence, and with it, a treasure that had been patiently waiting for the right moment to be rediscovered. Thomas Caldwell's situation had grown increasingly precarious in the years leading up to his discovery. The modest 150-acre farm that had sustained 4 generations of his family faced challenges that would have been unimaginable to his great-grandfather. Corporate farming operations had transformed the landscape of Westbrook County, their massive machinery working fields that stretched to every horizon, leaving the Caldwell Farm looking like a quaint relic from another era. Climate shifts had brought unpredictable weather patterns to the Allegheny Valley, with flash floods one season and drought the next, making traditional farming methods increasingly unreliable. At the kitchen table that morning, Martha, his wife of 38 years, reviewed their mounting bills while sipping coffee from a mug their daughter Rebecca had made in high school. The local newspaper lay open beside her plate, its headlines announcing yet another family farm sale to Keystone Agricultural Enterprises, the corporation that had been systematically acquiring property throughout the valley. "That's the Donovan place," Martha said softly, her finger tracing the article. "Third family farm this year." The Donovans had been their neighbors for as long as Thomas could remember. Their children had attended the same schools, shared equipment during harvests, and stood together at county fairs. The financial pressure had been building steadily. Modern farming required expensive GPS-guided equipment, specialized seed varieties, and proprietary fertilizers that needed to be purchased annually. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Thomas's 30-year-old tractor, a faithful companion through countless planting seasons, had broken down repeatedly during the spring cultivation, and the repairs had depleted their emergency fund. The replacement costs for modern equipment were staggering, and the bank's terms for a new loan seemed designed to push aging farmers towards selling rather than continuing. Thomas had been forced to lease additional acreage to more prosperous neighbors just to generate enough income to cover their property taxes, watching others profit from land his family had owned for a century. Their modest farmhouse, with its white clapboard siding and wraparound porch, needed a new roof, and the barn required structural repairs they couldn't afford. The cost of maintaining the unused silo seemed like an unnecessary burden, yet county regulations prevented simply demolishing a structure that had been designated as historically significant. Rebecca, now 34 and working as an agricultural scientist in Maryland, called frequently with suggestions about transitioning to specialized organic crops or developing agritourism opportunities. But each innovation required capital investment they simply didn't have. Daniel, their 30-year-old son who worked for an insurance company in Harrisburg, drove out on weekends to help with maintenance and repairs, his childhood on the farm having given him practical skills his office colleagues lacked. "We need to discuss Keystone's offer," Martha said quietly after hanging up from a call with Rebecca. Thomas's jaw tightened at the mention of the corporation's persistent attempts to acquire their property. The latest figure they'd presented was substantial, enough to pay off their debts, provide a comfortable retirement, and still leave something for Rebecca and Daniel, but accepting meant being the first Caldwell to surrender the land since. Jeremiah had established the farm during the agricultural boom following the First World War. The black and white photographs hanging in Thomas's modest office told the story of his family's legacy. There was Jeremiah Caldwell, standing proudly before his newly constructed silo in 1918, his expression determined beneath a flat cap, with what appeared to be notes or blueprints clutched in one hand. Next to it, a photo of Thomas's grandfather. Edward showed him receiving an Agricultural Innovation Award in 1955 for his soil conservation techniques. The Caldwell name had always been associated with a practical, modest approach to farming innovation, finding ways to sustain the land through changing times without sacrificing independence. The previous weekend, Thomas had found Daniel sitting alone on the porch steps, reviewing the Keystone contract with a troubled expression. "It's a generous offer, Dad," he'd said without looking up. "They've even included provisions to preserve the silo as a historical landmark." The fact that his son, who had once sworn he'd take over the farm someday, was now considering the practical benefits of selling, struck Thomas like a physical blow. The reality of modern agriculture had transformed his son's dreams, just as it had transformed the valley. Martha had taken a part-time position at the Millfield Public Library to help make ends meet, cataloging local historical records and organizing community events 3 days a week. The extra income helped with household expenses, but it couldn't address the fundamental challenges facing their small farm in an industry now dominated by economies of scale and corporate efficiency. The ancient silo loomed over it all, its shadow falling across the barnyard each afternoon, like a daily reminder of both their heritage and their current struggles. Thomas had always wondered why Jeremiah had invested so heavily in its construction, especially given the economic uncertainties following the Great War. The structure's scale and complexity seemed excessive for their operation even at its peak, and historical society records showed that Jeremiah had taken substantial loans to finance its construction, a financial risk that seemed at odds with his reputation for careful management. Recent changes in agricultural regulations had rendered many aspects of traditional farming uneconomical for small operators. Modern storage facilities with computer-controlled environments had made structures like their old silo obsolete. Many neighboring farms had demolished similar structures, replacing them with more efficient systems, or simply returning the land to production. Something had always held Thomas back from following suit, some instinct that told him the structure held more value than mere grain storage capacity. That morning, as Thomas watched Daniel drive away back to his city job, a certified letter arrived from the bank. The bright red final notice stamped across its envelope made his stomach tighten. Martha stood beside him as he opened it, both already anticipating its contents. The bank was calling in their operating loan early, giving them 90 days to either refinance under substantially higher rates or face foreclosure proceedings. The timing couldn't have been worse. Harvest was just weeks away, and without operating capital to see it through, they would be forced to sell crops immediately at lower prices rather than storing for better market conditions. The letter trembled slightly in Thomas's weathered hands as he read it, the formal language barely masking the threat to his family's legacy. Without this financing, they couldn't complete the harvest efficiently. Without a successful harvest, the Caldwell Farm would likely join the growing list of family operations swallowed by corporate agriculture. As he stared at the imposing silhouette of the old silo against the morning sky, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that his great-grandfather had built it for more than just grain storage. The unusual structural features, the excessive foundation, the strange access panels, it all suggested a purpose that remained hidden, waiting to be discovered. What he didn't know then was that the contents of that century-old structure would soon offer a solution to his family's problems in a way that none of them could have imagined, and that the legacy of Jeremiah Caldwell would prove more valuable than anyone in Millfield could have possibly anticipated. The discovery that would change everything happened on a crisp Tuesday morning in early October. Thomas had spent the previous week carefully studying the anomalies revealed by the ground-penetrating radar and comparing them with the cryptic notes and diagrams in Jeremiah's portfolio. With Daniel's help, he had identified what appeared to be a hidden access mechanism incorporated into the silo's base, a sophisticated system of counterweights and precisely placed brick patterns that seemed designed to conceal and protect something of significant value. Martha had insisted on documenting everything as they worked, her experience with historical preservation at the library giving her a keen appreciation for proper recording procedures. Armed with a digital camera, notebooks, and the specialized tools needed to work with the silo's century-old brick and concrete, they began the careful process of accessing what lay beneath the structure. The autumn morning air carried the scent of ripening apples from the small orchard behind the farmhouse as Thomas and Daniel positioned themselves at the silo's base. Following the diagrams from Jeremiah's portfolio, they identified a sequence of bricks that appeared slightly different in color and texture from their surroundings, differences so subtle they had gone unnoticed for generations. According to Great-grandpa's notes, Daniel said, tracing the faded ink on the yellowed paper. There should be a specific pressure sequence, like an old-fashioned combination lock built into the brickwork itself. The engineering concept seemed advanced even by today's standards, let alone for rural Pennsylvania in 1918. Working methodically, Thomas applied pressure to the bricks in the sequence indicated in the portfolio. After the fourth brick, they heard a distinct mechanical click from within the wall, the sound of century-old mechanisms activating for perhaps the first time since Jeremiah himself had sealed them. The section of wall, which had appeared solid and unremarkable for generations, shifted slightly, revealing a seam that had been invisibly incorporated into the brick pattern. "Unbelievable," Martha whispered, photographing each step of the process. "The craftsmanship required to conceal this so perfectly, it's extraordinary." With careful pressure applied to what now appeared to be a disguised door, a section of the silo's base swung inward, moving with surprising ease despite decades of disuse. The hinges, made of what appeared to be brass, showed almost no corrosion, suggesting a level of metallurgical knowledge uncommon for the period. The opening revealed a narrow staircase descending beneath the silo floor, a feature that appeared on no existing plans or family records. The staircase itself was a marvel of early 20th century engineering, constructed of concrete reinforced with what looked like a copper alloy mesh that had prevented deterioration despite a century of Pennsylvania's freeze-thaw cycles. Thomas led the way down, his flashlight beam revealing walls lined with what appeared to be a thin layer of some early waterproofing material that had maintained its integrity remarkably well. The stairs descended about 15 feet before opening into a circular chamber that matched the diameter of the silo above, its ceiling supported by an elegant arrangement of metal beams that distributed the enormous weight of the structure overhead. The engineering was sophisticated even by modern standards. Jeremiah had created a space that could remain structurally sound for centuries. As their flashlight beams swept the chamber, all three Caldwells gasped at what the light revealed. The underground room was filled with rows of carefully organized mechanical devices, prototype agricultural implements, and what appeared to be early industrial designs, all preserved in a remarkably pristine condition. The space had been designed as a perfect preservation environment, with what appeared to be passive dehumidification systems and temperature regulation that had protected its contents without requiring active maintenance. "Dad," Daniel breathed, his finance degree and practical farm experience allowing him to recognize the significance of what they were seeing. "These aren't just old farm implements. These look like prototypes, original designs that never made it to market." Martha's flashlight beam had found a large metal plaque mounted on the far wall, its brass surface still gleaming in the artificial light. The inscription read, "The Heritage Collection, American Agricultural Innovation, preserved by Jeremiah, Caldwell and the Pioneer Circle, to be revealed when most needed." Below the plaque sat a heavy oak desk, its surface supporting a leather-bound volume that appeared to be a detailed catalogue of the chamber's contents. As Thomas carefully opened this unexpected guide, he discovered methodically organized entries describing each item in the collection, not just what they were, but who had designed them, their intended purpose, and why they had never been commercially produced. "This is incredible," Martha said, carefully examining what appeared to be an early mechanical harvester design unlike any that had ever been manufactured. "According to this plate, this was designed by Henry Williamson in 1915, but I've never heard of him in any agricultural history." Daniel had moved to another section of the chamber where larger implements stood protected under custom-fitted canvas covers. Carefully removing one cover revealed a gleaming prototype of what appeared to be a soil analysis and treatment system, combining mechanical and chemical processes in ways that seemed decades ahead of its time. "According to this tag," he said, reading from a metal plate attached to the machine. This was designed to analyze soil composition and automatically adjust fertilizer application based on specific crop needs. That's technology we barely have perfected today, let alone a century ago. As they continued their exploration, the true scope of what Jeremiah Caldwell had preserved became increasingly clear. The chamber contained dozens of agricultural innovations that had never seen mass production, designs that had been developed by a loose network of independent inventors and progressive farmers during the early 20th century, but had been unable to compete with the mass-produced equipment of emerging agricultural corporations. Thomas found himself drawn to a collection of journals and correspondence stored in a specially designed cabinet against one wall. The documents revealed that Jeremiah had been part of a group called the Pioneer Circle, independent inventors and innovative farmers who had developed agricultural technologies focused on sustainability, soil preservation, and small farm efficiency decades before such concepts became mainstream concerns. They were creating technology specifically designed for family farms, Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion as he read through his great-grandfather's detailed notes. Equipment that would have allowed smaller operations to remain competitive without massive capital investment or extensive land holdings. Martha had discovered another section of documents that explained the chamber's purpose more explicitly. According to these records, she said, the Pioneer Circle believed that American agriculture was heading toward corporate consolidation that would eventually threaten family farms. They created this collection to preserve alternative technological approaches that prioritized sustainability and independence over scale and standardization. The most remarkable aspect of the collection wasn't just its historical significance, but its potential contemporary value. Many of the designs incorporated principles and approaches that had been independently rediscovered decades later, some representing solutions to agricultural challenges that remained relevant in the present day. Others demonstrated innovative approaches that had never been fully explored by mainstream agricultural engineering. As morning gave way to afternoon, the Caldwells carefully documented their findings, taking photographs and notes of each significant item. The implications of their discovery were still sinking in. This wasn't just a historical curiosity, but potentially a collection of immense value to agricultural museums, historians of technology, and even modern sustainable farming initiatives. We need expert help to properly understand what we've found, Martha said, as they finally emerged from the chamber into the fading afternoon light. This isn't just about our family history anymore. This is something much bigger. Thomas nodded, in agreement, but as he secured the hidden entrance using the mechanism detailed in Jeremiah's notes, he couldn't help but reflect on the timing of their discovery. With the bank's deadline looming and their financial situation growing increasingly desperate, the hidden collection preserved by his great-grandfather might represent not just a historical legacy, but a potential lifeline for the Caldwell Farm itself. What none of them fully realized yet was how the contents of that underground chamber would soon attract attention from unexpected quarters, from prestigious museums and universities to private collectors and corporate archives, all eager to access a lost chapter of American agricultural innovation that had been waiting patiently beneath the Pennsylvania soil for over a century. Tomorrow, Thomas said as they walked back toward the farmhouse in the golden light of late afternoon, I'll call Dr. Harper at the State University. If anyone can help us understand what we've really found here, it's her. Little did he know that this simple decision would set in motion a chain of events that would transform not just the fate of the Caldwell Farm, but potentially the understanding of American agricultural history itself. The legacy that Jeremiah Caldwell had preserved was about to emerge into the light after a century of darkness, and its impact would extend far beyond the boundaries of their modest 150 acres. The morning after their discovery, Thomas called. Dr. Olivia Harper, the agricultural historian from Pennsylvania State, who had occasionally consulted on historic farms in Westbrook County. Her reputation for discretion was as solid as her academic credentials, and Thomas knew they needed expert guidance before word of their find spread beyond the family. Dr. Harper arrived at the Caldwell Farm just after noon the following day, her university-issued SUV kicking up dust along the gravel drive. She was a tall woman in her late 40s with practical clothing and an air of contained excitement that her professional demeanor couldn't quite hide. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, shaking Thomas's hand firmly at the farmhouse door. "Your call certainly piqued my interest. It's not every day someone mentions finding prototype agricultural equipment from the early 20th century." Martha had prepared lunch, but Dr. Harper was too eager to begin her examination to sit down for a meal. "Perhaps afterward," she suggested politely, her eyes already drifting toward the brick silo, visible through the kitchen window. Thomas led her across the barnyard, explaining how they had discovered the hidden chamber and sharing what they had learned from Jeremiah's documents so far. Dr. Harper listened intently, asking occasional clarifying questions, but reserved any substantial comments until she could see the collection herself. As they approached the silo, she paused to examine its exterior with a practiced eye. "The brickwork is exceptional," she noted, running her fingers along the weathered surface. This level of precision wasn't common for agricultural structures. Of the period, your great-grandfather spared no expense. When Thomas demonstrated the hidden mechanism that revealed the entrance to the underground chamber, Dr. Harper's professional composure briefly faltered. "This is extraordinary," she breathed, examining the ingenious system of pressure points and counterweights. "The engineering principles at work here, they're far beyond typical early 20th century agricultural construction." Descending into the preservation chamber, Dr. Harper fell completely silent for several minutes as she slowly circled the room, her experienced gaze taking in every detail of the collection. She moved methodically from one artifact to another, occasionally consulting a small notebook she pulled from her jacket pocket, her expression growing increasingly astonished. "Mr. Caldwell," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, "do you understand what you found here?" Without waiting for an answer, she continued, "This isn't just a collection of antique farm equipment. These are functioning prototypes of agricultural innovations that were decades ahead of their time, many of which never made it into production." She carefully examined what appeared to be an early soil analysis system. This device incorporates principles that weren't widely used until the 1960s. The documentation suggests it was designed in 1917. Moving to another section, she gestured toward what looked like a specialized harvesting attachment. "And this implements a selective harvesting technique that we consider fairly modern, allowing crops to be harvested at optimal ripeness rather than all at once." As the afternoon progressed, Dr. Harper's initial excitement transformed into scholarly reverence. She photographed each item meticulously, took detailed notes, and examined the cataloging system Jeremiah had created with obvious admiration. "Your great-grandfather wasn't just collecting these innovations," she explained. "He was preserving them systematically, creating a comprehensive archive of agricultural technology that existed outside the mainstream development path." Martha joined them later, bringing coffee and sandwiches which they ate perched on wooden crates as Dr. Harper shared her preliminary assessment. "Based on what I'm seeing, your great-grandfather was part of a network of independent inventors and agricultural innovators who were developing technologies that emphasized sustainability, small farm efficiency, and soil preservation, priorities that were largely overlooked by the major equipment manufacturers of the era, who were focused on scale and standardization. Thomas nodded slowly, the pieces beginning to fit together. So these are the roads not taken in agricultural development, the alternatives to industrial farming. Exactly, Dr. Harper confirmed, gesturing expansively at the collection. After World War I, American agriculture began its long transformation toward industrialization and consolidation. These inventions represent a different path, one focused on maintaining the viability of family farms through appropriate technology rather than massive scale. As evening approached, Dr. Harper finally closed her notebook and turned to the Caldwells with a serious expression. "I need to be very clear about something," she said carefully. "What you've discovered here is of immense historical significance. This collection documents an entire alternative history of American agricultural development that has been largely lost to conventional scholarship." Thomas and Martha exchanged glances, beginning to grasp the magnitude of their discovery. "What should we do next?" Martha asked pragmatically. Dr. Harper considered the question before responding. "First, this collection needs proper documentation and preservation. I can help with that, and the university has resources we can access." She hesitated briefly before continuing, "But there's something else you should consider. The financial value of this collection is likely substantial. Beyond its historical significance, these prototypes represent intellectual property and design innovations that will be of interest to museums, private collectors, and possibly even modern agricultural corporations." This aspect hadn't fully registered with Thomas until now. "You think these old machines are worth money, even after all this time?" Mr. Caldwell," Dr. Harper said with a small smile. "Based on what I've seen today, I believe several major agricultural and technological museums would consider this collection absolutely priceless. The provenance is impeccable, the preservation extraordinary, and the historical significance impossible to overstate." As they climbed back up the stairs to the fading daylight outside, Thomas felt a strange mixture of pride and uncertainty. His great-grandfather's foresight and dedication had created something of tremendous value, both historically and financially. Yet the responsibility of deciding what to do next weighed heavily on him. "I'd like to bring in a small team of specialists," Dr. Harper suggested as they walked back toward the farmhouse. "People I trust completely. A conservator, a mechanical engineer with expertise in historical technology, and perhaps a curator from the National Agricultural History Museum. With your permission, of course." Thomas nodded his agreement, still processing the implications of the day's revelations. "How soon can they come?" he asked, thinking of the bank's 90-day deadline looming over them. "I can have them here by the end of the week," Dr. Harper promised. "And Mr. Caldwell? Until we've fully documented everything, I strongly suggest keeping this discovery as private as possible. Collections like this can attract attention." That evening, after Dr. Harper had departed with promises to return soon, the Caldwell family gathered around their kitchen table to discuss the day's developments. Daniel had arrived from Harrisburg after receiving his father's cryptic phone call about significant developments, and Rebecca had joined via video call from her apartment in Baltimore. "So let me get this straight," Daniel said, still trying to process what his parents had told him. Great-great-grandpa Jeremiah built a secret underground vault to preserve a collection of agricultural inventions that never made it to market. And now Dr. Harper thinks it might be worth millions? "That's simplifying it considerably," Martha replied, "but essentially correct. These aren't just antiques, Daniel. According to Dr. Harper, they're important historical artifacts that document an alternative approach to agricultural development. one that might have kept family farms viable if it had been more widely adopted. Rebecca's face on the laptop screen showed intense interest. "This aligns perfectly with my research," she said, her academic background in sustainable agriculture clearly excited by the discovery. There's been speculation about lost innovations from that period, designs that prioritized soil health and small farm efficiency, but very little survived the push toward industrial agriculture. Thomas sat quietly, turning his coffee cup in weathered hands as he listened to his family discuss the implications of what lay beneath the old silo. The bank's deadline still loomed, but now a new possibility had emerged, one that might allow them to preserve both the farm and Jeremiah's legacy. "We need to be careful," he finally said, interrupting the animated conversation. "Doctor, Harper made it clear that we should keep this quiet until everything's properly documented." He didn't voice his deeper concern that Keystone Agricultural Enterprises might find ways to claim the collection if they learned of its existence. Before the family could establish clear ownership and provenance, the family agreed to proceed with caution, allowing Dr. Harper's team to assess and document the collection while keeping news of the discovery confined to those directly involved. Daniel would arrange to work remotely for the next few weeks, and Rebecca promised to consult colleagues who specialized in historical agricultural patents without revealing the specific nature of their find. True to her word, Dr. Harper returned 3 days later with a small team of specialists. Dr. Marcus Chen, a mechanical engineer specializing in historical technology restoration. Eleanor Winters, a conservator from the university's agricultural archives, and James Patterson, a curator from the National Agricultural History Museum who had driven overnight from Washington after receiving Dr. Harper's carefully worded call. The team descended into the underground chamber with professional equipment and obvious excitement. By midday, they had established a temporary workspace within the silo's ground floor, running power cables from the barn to support specialized lighting, digital documentation equipment, and climate monitoring devices. Patterson, the museum curator, emerged from his first inspection of the chamber, looking slightly dazed. "In 30 years of museum work," he told Thomas as they stood in the shadow of the silo, "I've never seen anything like this. The preservation is remarkable, but it's the comprehensiveness that's truly astonishing. Your great-grandfather wasn't collecting random artifacts. He was systematically preserving an entire alternative technological approach." Dr. Chen's assessment focused on the engineering aspects of the collection. Many of these designs incorporate principles that mainstream agricultural engineering wouldn't adopt for decades, he explained, showing Thomas detailed sketches he'd made of several mechanisms. This soil enrichment system, for instance, it's using biodynamic principles that weren't widely recognized until the 1970s, yet the documentation dates it to 1916. Eleanor Winters, the conservator, concentrated on ensuring the artifacts remained stable now that the sealed environment had been opened. "The preservation methods your great-grandfather employed were remarkably effective," she told Martha as they carefully documented the condition of each item. The combination of temperature control, humidity management, and materials selection shows an understanding of conservation principles that was well ahead of standard practices for that period. As the team worked through each section of the collection, a clearer picture emerged of what Jeremiah Caldwell and his associates had been attempting to preserve. The artifacts represented a comprehensive approach to sustainable small-scale agriculture that emphasized soil health, energy efficiency, and appropriate mechanization, a vision of farming that stood in stark contrast to the industrial model that would come to dominate American agriculture. On the afternoon of the team's second day, Dr. Harper made a discovery that added significant context to the collection. Hidden within a specially designed compartment in Jeremiah's desk was a complete manifest of the Pioneer Circle, the network of innovators who had contributed to the collection. The document included names, locations, and specific innovations, along with what appeared to be a map marking similar preservation sites across the country. "This is extraordinary," Dr. Harper said, carefully photographing each page of the manifest. "According to this, your great-grandfather's preservation chamber wasn't unique. The Pioneer Circle established at least 7 similar repositories across the United States, each specializing in different aspects of agricultural innovation." Patterson examined the map with growing excitement. If this is accurate, there could be other collections still waiting to be discovered. The locations correspond to agricultural regions that were significant during that period: the Central Valley of California, the wheat belt of Kansas, the dairy country of Wisconsin. Dr. Chen pointed to notations beside several of the locations. "These appear to be specializations. Your great-grandfather's site focused on mechanical innovations and soil management, while this one in California seems to have concentrated on irrigation and water conservation techniques." Indeed, the team worked late into the evening, cataloging and documenting each artifact while cross-referencing them with Jeremiah's meticulous records. Thomas and Martha took turns bringing meals to the silo, listening to the experts' increasingly animated discussions about the historical significance of what they'd found. As Thomas drove back to the farmhouse after delivering dinner to the team, he noticed headlights turning onto their long driveway, an unusual occurrence in the evening, especially given their remote location. The vehicle, an expensive black SUV with tinted windows, continued toward the house at a deliberate pace. Thomas parked quickly and met the unexpected visitor on the front porch. The man who emerged from the SUV introduced himself as Jason Mercer, presenting credentials identifying him as a representative of the National Historical Preservation Office, a government agency Thomas had never heard of. He was well-dressed, articulate, and oddly well-informed about the Caldwell property. "Mr. Caldwell," Mercer said with a carefully calibrated smile, "I apologize for arriving unannounced, but my office recently received information suggesting you may have discovered items of significant historical interest on your property. I'm here to offer federal assistance in evaluating and preserving any such artifacts." Thomas felt immediate unease. They had been extremely careful about who knew of their discovery. Only Dr. Harper's team had been informed. Yet somehow this information had reached federal authorities. "I'm not sure what you're referring to," he replied cautiously. "We're just doing some structural repairs on our old silo." Mercer's smile didn't waver. "Of course. However, our department has specific protocols for historical agricultural artifacts dating from the post-World War I period, particularly those associated with independent inventor cooperatives like the Pioneer Circle." The specific mention of the Pioneer Circle, information they had uncovered only hours earlier, confirmed Thomas's suspicions that someone had leaked details of their discovery. "I think you should speak with Dr. Harper from the State University," he suggested, buying time. "She's been consulting on the historical aspects of our renovation." "Ah, Dr. Harper," Mercer nodded. "Yes, we're familiar with her work. I was hoping to speak with her team as well. Are they still on the premises?" Before Thomas could respond, Martha appeared in the doorway, quickly assessing the situation. With the instincts developed through decades of farm life, she stepped forward with welcoming hospitality that effectively masked her own caution. "You must be tired after your drive," she said to Mercer. "Why don't you come inside for coffee while Thomas goes to see if Dr. Harper is available? She and her students have been documenting the original construction methods of our silo for a university project on historical farm structures." Martha's quick thinking gave Thomas the opportunity to warn Dr. Harper about their unexpected visitor. He drove back to the silo where the team was still working and quickly explained the situation. Dr. Harper's reaction was immediate concern. "The National Historical Preservation Office," she repeated with a frown. "There's no such agency. Mr. Caldwell, at least not one that would send representatives unannounced to private properties." She exchanged glances with Patterson, the museum curator. "This is exactly what I was concerned about. Word of significant historical discoveries travels quickly, and unfortunately not everyone who takes an interest has legitimate scholarly intentions." Patterson nodded grimly. "The market for historical agricultural technology is surprisingly active, especially for innovative prototypes that never reached production. Museums compete with private collectors and even corporate archives for significant artifacts." "What should we do?" Thomas asked, glancing toward the farmhouse where Martha was keeping their visitor occupied. Dr. Harper considered briefly before responding. "First, we secure the chamber and all documentation. Eleanor, can you and Dr. Chen pack up everything we've been working on?" The conservator nodded and immediately began gathering their materials. "Mr. Patterson, please contact your security office at the museum. Explain that we may need assistance with protecting a significant historical discovery." Turning back to Thomas, she continued, "We'll go speak with this Agent Mercer together. I know most legitimate representatives in this field, and I can quickly determine if his credentials are authentic. In the meantime, Daniel should remain here with the collection, just to be safe." Thomas and Dr. Harper returned to the farmhouse to find Martha and Mercer seated at the kitchen table, coffee cups between them. Martha had masterfully kept the conversation on generalities, the history of the area, the challenges of maintaining historic farm structures, the weather. Mercer rose as they entered, his attention immediately focusing on Dr. Harper. "Dr. Olivia Harper," he said with recognition. "Your work on agricultural technology preservation is well regarded. I'm Jason Mercer, National Historical Preservation Office." He extended his hand, which Dr. Harper briefly shook while studying his identification card. "That's interesting, Mr. Mercer," she replied, with professional courtesy masking skepticism. "I wasn't aware of a National Historical Preservation Office with jurisdiction over private agricultural artifacts. Perhaps you could clarify which department you represent: Agriculture, Interior, Smithsonian?" A barely perceptible tension appeared in Mercer's composed demeanor. "We're a specialized division working across departmental boundaries. Given the sensitive nature of some historical technologies, our office maintains a somewhat lower profile than standard preservation agencies." Dr. Harper nodded, as if this explanation made perfect sense. "Of course. And what specifically brought your office's attention to the Caldwell Farm?" "We're simply conducting a standard historical documentation project on period agricultural structures." Mercer smiled thinly. "Let's be candid, Doctor. We have reliable information that artifacts associated with the Pioneer Circle have been discovered here, specifically prototype agricultural implements preserved by Jeremiah Caldwell around 1918. My office has a mandate to ensure such items are properly documented and preserved according to federal guidelines." Thomas watched this exchange with growing concern, noting how Mercer's knowledge extended to specific details they had only recently uncovered themselves. The implication was clear. Someone with access to their discovery was sharing information, potentially compromising both the collection's security and the family's control over Jeremiah's legacy. Dr. Harper maintained her professional composure. "I see. Well, as the principal investigator for this site, I would certainly need to review these federal guidelines you mention. Perhaps you could provide the specific statutory authority under which your office operates. For our documentation." "Of course. This direct challenge to his authority caused Mercer's confident facade to flicker momentarily. "I can have those sent to your university office," he replied smoothly. "In the meantime, I'd appreciate a brief tour of what you've discovered, purely as a professional courtesy between preservation specialists." "Unfortunately, we've secured the site for the evening," Dr. Harper responded without hesitation. "Conservation protocols require controlled access, particularly during initial documentation phases. I'm sure you understand the importance of maintaining site integrity. Perhaps you could return tomorrow after I've had an opportunity to consult with the university's legal department about the appropriate protocols for federal agency involvement in our research project." Thomas recognized the subtle power struggle unfolding in his kitchen, Dr. Harper effectively challenging Mercer's authority while buying time to verify his credentials. Mercer seemed to realize he would make no further progress that evening and smoothly pivoted to a gracious departure. "Of course, proper protocols must be followed," he agreed, rising from the table. "I'll return tomorrow with the necessary documentation. In the meantime, I strongly advise maintaining strict security around the site. Historical artifacts of this nature can be tempting targets for unauthorized collectors." The implied threat beneath his cordial tone wasn't lost on anyone in the room. As Thomas walked Mercer to his vehicle, the agent paused for a final comment. "Mr. Caldwell, your family has preserved something of genuine historical significance. My office can ensure it receives the protection and recognition it deserves. We have resources beyond what a university team can provide, resources that could benefit your farm considerably." Thomas maintained a neutral expression. "We appreciate the interest, Mr. Mercer. We'll see you tomorrow." As the black SUV disappeared down the darkened driveway, Thomas returned to the house where Dr. Harper was already on her phone, speaking urgently with a colleague. "Yes, claims to be from something called the National Historical Preservation Office. No official credentials I recognized. Specifically mentioned the Pioneer Circle and Jeremiah Caldwell by name." Hanging up, she turned to Thomas and Martha with evident concern. "My colleague at the Department of Interior has never heard of this agency or this Agent Mercer. More troublingly, the specific details he mentioned suggest someone with direct knowledge of our discovery is feeding him information." Patterson had joined them from the silo, leaving Dr. Chen and Eleanor to secure the collection while Daniel stood watch. "I've contacted museum security," he reported. "They're sending 2 specialists first thing tomorrow morning. In the meantime, we should implement basic security protocols around the site." Martha, practical as always, began making arrangements for the additional people who would need accommodations. "Daniel can stay in his old room, and we can put the security people in the guest room. Dr. Harper, you and your team are welcome to stay here, rather than driving back to your hotel." As they organized these logistics, Thomas stepped onto the porch, staring toward the dark silhouette of the silo against the night sky. The discovery that had seemed like a potential salvation for their struggling farm had suddenly become something more complicated, something that others were already maneuvering to control or acquire. Dr. Harper joined him on the porch, her expression serious in the dim light. "Mr. Caldwell, I feel I should be direct with you. What your family has discovered has extraordinary historical and financial value, but that value makes it a target. There are private collectors, corporate archives, and possibly even foreign interests who would go to considerable lengths to acquire artifacts like these, particularly given their excellent provenance and condition." Thomas nodded slowly, beginning to grasp the full implications of their situation. "What should we do?" "First, we complete proper documentation, establishing clear ownership and historical significance. That's already underway. Second, we secure the collection physically. The museum security team will help with that. Third, we need to consider your family's long-term wishes for the collection. She hesitated before adding, "This discovery could easily resolve your farm's financial challenges, but you have options beyond simply selling the artifacts." The first rays of dawn were just breaking over the eastern hills when Thomas awoke. To the sound of vehicles coming up the gravel drive, he dressed quickly and made his way downstairs to find Martha already in the kitchen, preparing coffee for what promised to be a long day. Through the window, they watched as two unmarked vans pulled up beside Dr. Harper's university vehicle. 4 people emerged, 2 from each van, carrying equipment cases and what appeared to be security hardware. "The museum security team," Martha observed, pouring coffee into a thermos. Dr. Harper mentioned they would arrive early. Thomas nodded, pulling on his work jacket. "I'll go meet them. Can you call Daniel? He should be here for this." Outside, Dr. Harper was already introducing the new arrivals, 2 security specialists from the National Agricultural History Museum and 2 additional experts she had recruited. Dr. Eliza Montgomery, a patent historian specializing in early 20th century industrial innovation, and Robert Torres, a forensic accountant with expertise in valuing historical collections. "Mr. Caldwell," Dr. Harper said as Thomas approached, "these specialists will help us secure and properly evaluate what you've discovered. I hope you don't mind the early hour. We wanted to establish basic security protocols before word of your find spreads any further." The security specialists, Michael Reeves and Sandra Collins, were already conducting a perimeter assessment of the silo, examining sight lines and access points with professional efficiency. Torres, the accountant, was reviewing the preliminary inventory Dr. Harper had begun the previous day, while Dr. Montgomery unpacked specialized equipment for analyzing and dating the artifacts. "After our unexpected visitor last night," Dr. Harper explained quietly, "I felt additional precautions were warranted. Mr. Patterson made some inquiries through his museum contacts. There is no Jason Mercer registered with any legitimate federal historical preservation agency, nor is there a National Historical Preservation Office with the authority he claimed." Thomas frowned, watching as the security team installed discrete motion sensors around the silo's perimeter. Then who was he? And how did he know about the Pioneer Circle, about my great-grandfather? "That's what concerns me," Dr. Harper replied. "The details he referenced were too specific to be coincidental. Someone with knowledge of your discovery is sharing information, possibly someone who stands to profit from acquiring these artifacts before they're properly documented and protected." Daniel arrived from the farmhouse, carrying additional coffee and breakfast sandwiches Martha had prepared. The young man's background in insurance gave him a particular appreciation for the security measures being implemented. "Dr. Harper mentioned you're installing a monitoring system," he asked Reeves, the lead security specialist. "Motion detection, silent alerts, and remote camera access," Reeves confirmed, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Nothing obvious enough to draw attention, but sufficient to alert us to any unauthorized approach. The museum uses similar systems to protect traveling exhibitions." By mid-morning, the team had established a secure workspace within the silo's ground floor, directly above the hidden chamber. Temporary lighting illuminated the brick interior, and folding tables supported computers, documentation equipment, and conservation supplies. The entrance to the underground chamber remained concealed behind its ingenious brick mechanism, but now subtle security measures ensured that any attempt to access it would trigger immediate alerts. Dr. Montgomery, the patent historian, had begun the painstaking process of examining each artifact's technical specifications against historical patent records. "The documentation Jeremiah Caldwell maintained is extraordinary," she told Thomas as they reviewed his great-grandfather's cataloging system. "He didn't just preserve these innovations physically, he maintained complete technical specifications. designer attributions, and even correspondence about why these designs never reached commercial production. She pointed to detailed notes beside an unusual seed drilling apparatus. According to these records, this device was designed by Albert Whitman in 1919. It incorporated a soil analysis component that adjusted seed depth based on moisture content, a feature that didn't become standard in commercial equipment until the 1980s. But Whitman couldn't secure financing after the larger equipment manufacturers expressed concerns about its market viability. Thomas studied the carefully preserved documents, seeing a pattern emerge. So these weren't just random inventions that failed to find markets. They were systematically sidelined. Dr. Montgomery nodded. That appears to be the case. The documentation suggests that after World War I, agricultural industrialization followed a very specific path, one that favored large-scale operations and standardized approaches. The Pioneer Circle represented an alternative vision, one focused on small farm viability, soil preservation, and regional adaptation. Torres, the forensic accountant, had been quietly working through a financial assessment based on comparable historical collections and recent auction results. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, approaching with his tablet, "I've completed a preliminary valuation range for insurance purposes. Would you like to review it?" Thomas glanced at the screen and felt momentarily lightheaded. The figure Torres had calculated as a conservative minimum valuation for the collection was enough to pay off the farm's debts 10 times over. The upper range estimate, marked as exceptional museum acquisition value, contained so many zeros that Thomas had to count them twice. "This can't be right," he said, handing the tablet back with a shaking hand. "I assure you these figures are methodologically sound," Torres replied with professional certainty. "Historical agricultural prototypes with comprehensive documentation and provenance are extraordinarily rare. Add the connection to the Pioneer Circle, which has achieved almost mythical status among agricultural historians, and you have what the market would consider a once-in-a-generation find." Thomas stepped outside to process this information, finding himself staring at fields his family had worked for generations. The autumn sun illuminated the weathered red bricks of the silo, the structure that had stood as a silent guardian of his great-grandfather's secret for over a century. The magnitude of what Jeremiah had preserved, not just in historical significance but in sheer financial value, was almost impossible to comprehend. Martha joined him, sensing his overwhelmed state. "Torres showed me the figures," she said quietly, taking his hand. "It changes everything, doesn't it?" Before Thomas could respond, they noticed a familiar black SUV turning onto their driveway, the same vehicle that had brought the self-proclaimed Agent Mercer the previous evening. This time, however, it was followed by 2 additional vehicles, a luxury sedan and a truck with corporate markings partially obscured by road dust. Dr. Harper emerged from the silo, alerted by the security team, and quickly assessed the situation. "Mr. Caldwell, I suggest we meet these visitors at the house, not here at the silo. Dr. Montgomery and the security team will remain with the collection." Thomas nodded, and they walked briskly toward the farmhouse, reaching the front porch. Just as the 3 vehicles parked in the turnaround, Mercer emerged from the SUV, now dressed in a more formal suit. From the luxury sedan came an older man in expensive casual clothing that somehow managed to look both relaxed and authoritative, the unmistakable attire of significant wealth. The truck produced 2 men in corporate casual wear, one carrying a leather portfolio emblazoned with the Keystone Agricultural Enterprises logo. "Mr. Caldwell," Mercer called with practiced cordiality, "I've returned as promised. I hope you don't mind that I've brought some colleagues who share an interest in your discovery." Thomas remained on the porch, Martha and Dr. Harper flanking, him in a subtle show of unity. "Mr. Mercer," he replied evenly. "I believe Dr. Harper had some questions about your credentials." The older man from the sedan stepped forward smoothly, extending his hand as he mounted the porch steps. "Richard Harrington," he introduced himself with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to deference. "I apologize for any confusion. Jason works as a consultant for my foundation, the Harrington Historical Preservation Trust. We specialize in acquiring and protecting significant agricultural artifacts." Dr. Harper maintained a professional demeanor, though Thomas could sense her wariness. "I'm not familiar with your foundation, Mr. Harrington. Is it affiliated with any major museums or universities?" "We maintain a private collection," Harrington replied, his smile never wavering. "One of the most comprehensive assemblages of American agricultural technology in private hands. When Jason informed me about what the Caldwell family had discovered, I knew immediately that I needed to see it personally." The men from the truck had remained by their vehicle, observing the exchange with evident interest. Harrington gestured toward them casually. "You may recognize Andrew Bennett, Regional Director for Keystone Agricultural Enterprises. When I mentioned I was visiting your farm, he expressed interest in joining us. I believe his company has made several offers on your property in recent months." The deliberate mention of Keystone's acquisition attempts sent a clear message. Harrington was well informed about the Caldwell's financial situation and was positioning himself accordingly. Thomas felt a protective instinct rising within him, not just for the farm, but for his great-grandfather's hidden legacy. "Mr. Harrington," Thomas said carefully, "we're in the early stages of documenting what we've found. We're not ready for visitors or discussing any potential transactions." Harrington's expression remained pleasant, but his eyes hardened slightly. "I understand completely. However, I'm prepared to make an extremely generous offer, sight unseen, based solely on Jason's preliminary assessment. An offer that would resolve your current financial situation quite favorably and ensure these historical artifacts receive proper care in my foundation's purpose-built conservation facility." Martha stepped forward. "That's very generous, Mr. Harrington, but as my husband said, we're not ready to discuss such matters. Perhaps you could leave your contact information, and we'll be in touch when appropriate." Bennett, the Keystone representative, chose this moment to approach the porch. "While you're considering Mr. Harrington's offer, I'm authorized to present a revised proposal for your property, one that takes into account the historical significance of certain structures on the land." He held out the leather portfolio, which Thomas deliberately did not accept. "We appreciate your interest," Thomas replied firmly, "but this isn't a good time for these discussions." Harrington studied Thomas with the calculating gaze of someone unaccustomed to refusal. "Mr. Caldwell, I don't believe you fully understand the complexities of preserving artifacts of this nature. The costs involved in proper conservation, the security concerns, the legal complications regarding historical patents and intellectual property. My foundation is uniquely positioned to address these challenges." Dr. Harper stepped forward, her academic authority providing a counterbalance to Harrington's imposing presence. "Actually, Mr. Harrington, the Caldwell family has engaged appropriate professional assistance for exactly those concerns. The university and the National Agricultural History Museum have established protocols for such discoveries." A flash of annoyance crossed Harrington's face before his composed expression returned. Public institutions have their place, of course. However, their bureaucratic constraints and limited budgets often prevent them from providing the level of care and recognition these artifacts deserve. My offer would include establishing the Caldwell Family Conservation Fund, ensuring your great-grandfather's name remains prominently associated with these innovations. Bill. The careful targeting of family legacy, something Harrington correctly identified as important to Thomas, revealed the man's skill at negotiation. Yet something in his approach felt predatory, rather than collaborative, as if he were angling to acquire a commodity rather than preserve a historical legacy. "We appreciate your interest," Thomas repeated more firmly. "When we're ready to discuss the future of the collection, we'll consider all appropriate options. Until then, we need to focus on proper documentation and preservation." Harrington's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, though I should mention that historical artifacts of this nature can sometimes raise complicated questions of ownership. Your great-grandfather may have preserved these innovations, but the intellectual property rights could involve the original designers or their estates. Navigating these waters without experienced guidance can be challenging." The veiled threat was clear. Harrington was suggesting he could create legal complications if the Caldwells didn't cooperate with his acquisition attempts. Dr. Harper intervened before Thomas could respond. "The university's legal department is quite experienced with such matters, Mr. Harrington. In fact, they're already reviewing the comprehensive documentation Mr. Caldwell's great-grandfather maintained, which includes signed agreements with the original innovators specifically addressing ownership rights." This was stretching the truth. They had discovered such documentation but had not yet fully reviewed it. But Dr. Harper's confident assertion caused Harrington to reassess his position. He reached into his jacket and produced a business card, which he extended to Thomas. "My offer remains open, Mr. Caldwell. When you're ready to discuss terms that would benefit your family for generations to come, please call me directly, day or night." As the three men returned to their vehicles, Bennett paused to add a final comment. "Keystone's offer for your property has no expiration date, Mr. Caldwell. We are patient, but the bank's timeline might not be as flexible." Thus a deliberate reference to the Caldwell's financial deadline with the bank confirmed what Thomas had suspected. Someone with knowledge of their situation was sharing information with potential buyers, positioning them to exploit the family's vulnerability. After the vehicles had disappeared down the driveway, Dr. Harper turned to Thomas with evident concern. "Harrington is well known in collecting circles. He's built one of the largest private agricultural technology collections in the country, often by acquiring artifacts before museums can secure funding for purchases. The fact that he arrived with Keystone's representative suggests they may be working together to pressure you from multiple angles." Thomas nodded grimly. "We need to move faster on documenting everything. How soon can we establish clear ownership and protection for the collection?" "Mpedu, Dr. Montgomery is already cross-referencing the patents and ownership documents. Torres is preparing a formal valuation report that will help with insurance and potential museum acquisition discussions. By the end of the week, we should have a comprehensive documentation package that establishes provenance and legal ownership." Martha, always practical, addressed the immediate security concern. "Should we be worried about them returning? Or trying to access the silo without permission?" "The security team has implemented basic protections, but we should accelerate those efforts," Dr. Harper admitted. "I'll contact Patterson at the museum about expediting additional measures." They returned to the silo to find Daniel engaged in animated conversation with Dr. Montgomery. The patent historian had made a significant discovery while reviewing Jeremiah's documentation. "Your great-grandfather wasn't just preserving these innovations," she explained, showing Thomas a ledger she had found concealed within a hidden compartment in the oak desk. He was actively working to protect them from corporate appropriation. This ledger details attempts by larger agricultural manufacturers to acquire and essentially bury competing technologies that threatened their business models. Daniel pointed to specific entries that documented meetings between Pioneer Circle members and corporate representatives. According to these notes, companies like Continental Harvester, which eventually became part of today's agricultural Conglomerates approached individual inventors with lowball offers for their patents, then shelved the technologies to prevent market disruption. Dr. Montgomery nodded. This was a common practice during periods of industrial consolidation. What's extraordinary is that your great-grandfather and the pioneer circle recognized the pattern and created this preservation network specifically to prevent innovative approaches from being lost to history. Thomas studied the ledger entries, recognizing names of companies that had evolved into the modern agricultural giants that now dominated the industry, including Keystone Agricultural Enterprises, which had been attempting to acquire his farm. So there's a direct connection between the corporations that tried to suppress these innovations a century ago and the companies trying to buy our farm today, he observed quietly. It appears so, Dr. Montgomery confirmed. And based on these records, the Pioneer Circle established multiple preservation sites across the country, each protecting different aspects of agricultural innovation. The network was deliberately decentralized to prevent any single collection from being compromised. This revelation added another dimension to Thomas's understanding of his great-grandfather's actions. Jeremiah hadn't just been preserving technology, he had been engaged in a deliberate effort to protect agricultural innovation from corporate control, ensuring that alternative approaches would survive for future generations. The security specialist, Reeves, approached with an update on their protective measures. We've installed motion detection around the perimeter and concealed cameras covering all approaches to the silo. The feed is being monitored remotely by our museum security office, with alerts set to notify us of any unauthorized activity. What about the hidden chamber itself? Thomas asked, concerned about the collection's physical security. We've reinforced the original concealment mechanism and added a modern electronic lock that requires both the original sequence and a digital code. Without both components, the entrance remains secured. Additionally, we've installed environmental monitoring to alert us to any changes in temperature, humidity, or air pressure that might indicate tampering. These measures provided some reassurance, but Thomas couldn't shake his concern about Harrington's veiled threats regarding ownership complications. He pulled Dr. Harper aside to discuss this specific worry. How vulnerable are we legally? Could someone like Harrington create problems with the ownership claims? Dr. Harper considered the question carefully. Based on what we've found so far, your great-grandfather was meticulous about documentation. The collaboration agreements with other Pioneer Circle members specifically address ownership and preservation rights. However, when dealing with century-old artifacts of this value, we should expect legal challenges from various quarters. She gestured toward Torres, who was continuing his valuation work. That's why proper documentation is so crucial. We're establishing a clear provenance chain and ownership record that would stand up to legal scrutiny. Thomas nodded, glancing toward the hidden entrance to the chamber where his great-grandfather had preserved not just machines, but a vision of agricultural development that prioritized sustainability and individual farm viability over corporate consolidation. How soon can we complete the initial documentation phase, he asked, thinking of both Harrington's pressure and the bank's looming deadline. For basic protection and insurance purposes, we should have the essential documentation completed within the week, Dr. Harper replied. A comprehensive catalogue with full historical context and valuation will take longer, perhaps another 2 to 3 weeks. This timeline aligned poorly with the bank's 90-day deadline, which had already been reduced to just under 70 days. Thomas would need to make decisions about the collection's future before the complete documentation process could be finished. As evening approached, the team secured the silo for the night, with Reeves remaining on site as overnight security. The rest of the specialists returned to their hotel in town, planning to resume work early the following morning. Thomas, Martha, and Daniel walked back to the farmhouse together, the autumn sunset casting long shadows across fields that had been in their family for generations. In the kitchen, as Martha prepared dinner, Rebecca called from Baltimore with an update from her end. Her video image on Daniel's laptop showed the excitement that had kept her working through the night. "I've been researching the Pioneer Circle through academic archives," she explained, "and found references to them in several agricultural history journals. They're described as a loosely organized network of independent inventors and progressive farmers who opposed the rapid consolidation of American agriculture following World War I. She held up a scholarly article for them to see. This paper from 1987 speculates about rumored preservation sites established by Circle members, but dismisses them as agricultural folklore due to lack of physical evidence. Dad, what you've discovered isn't just historically significant. It confirms what some historians have speculated about for decades. Thomas felt a deepening appreciation for his great-grandfather's foresight. Jeremiah had recognized the value of what he was preserving, not just for his own family, but for future generations who might need alternative approaches to agriculture. "There's something else," Rebecca continued, her expression growing more serious. "I asked a colleague who specializes in agricultural patent history about the name Richard Harrington, without explaining why. He immediately warned me to be careful. Apparently, Harrington has a reputation for aggressive acquisition tactics, including using legal challenges to pressure families into selling historical collections at discounted prices." This confirmed Thomas's instinctive distrust of the wealthy collector. "He showed up today with the Keystone representative," Thomas told his daughter, "tried to pressure us into making an immediate decision." Rebecca's concern was evident even through the video call. "That's his typical approach. According to my colleague, Harrington often partners with developers or corporations that want the land where historical artifacts are found. They coordinate their pressure tactics, one threatening foreclosure or legal complications, the other offering a solution through immediate purchase." Martha joined the conversation, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "So Harrington and Keystone are working together to force a quick sale before we fully understand what we have or what it's worth." "Exactly," Rebecca confirmed. "And they'll use your bank deadline against you. Do we have any options for extension?" Daniel, who had been quietly calculating figures based on Torres's preliminary valuation, looked up from his notepad. "With a collection valued at what Torres estimates, we should be able to secure bridge financing using the artifacts as collateral. I have contacts at several banks in Harrisburg that deal with high-value assets. I can make some calls tomorrow." Thomas nodded gratefully at his son's practical approach. The discovery might provide a path to preserving both the farm and Jeremiah's legacy, but navigating the complex interests now converging on their modest property would require careful planning and professional guidance. As night fell over the farm, Thomas stepped onto the porch alone, gazing toward the silhouette of the silo against the star-filled sky. For generations, that structure had kept its secret, a testament to his great-grandfather's determination to preserve not just physical artifacts, but a vision of agricultural independence that seemed increasingly relevant in today's world of corporate farming. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more documentation work, potential legal considerations, and likely increased pressure from Harrington and Keystone. But tonight, Thomas felt a renewed connection to the land his family had stewarded for generations and a deepening appreciation for the legacy Jeremiah had hidden beneath that weathered brick silo. A legacy that might now secure the farm's future, in ways none of them could have imagined just days ago. 3 weeks after the initial discovery beneath the old brick silo, the Caldwell Farm had transformed from a struggling family operation to the center of what agricultural historians were calling the most significant historical find of the century. The weathered red brick structure that had stood silently for generations now bustled with activity as documentation teams, conservation specialists, and security personnel worked to preserve and protect Jeremiah Caldwell's remarkable legacy. Thomas stood at the edge of the east field, watching the morning sun illuminate the silo's curved surface, while a light autumn frost crunched beneath his boots. The air carried the familiar scent of harvest, rich soil, drying corn, and the ever-present promise of approaching winter. For a moment, he could almost imagine his great-grandfather standing in this same spot a century earlier, watching his newly constructed silo and knowing the extraordinary secret it contained. Dr. Harper approached. From the direction of the barn, where temporary office space had been established for the growing team of specialists. Her typically composed demeanor showed signs of excitement as she clutched a leather portfolio, one of Jeremiah's original document cases they had discovered in the hidden chamber. "Mr. Caldwell," she called as she drew nearer. "We've made a breakthrough in understanding the full scope of what your great-grandfather preserved." She opened the portfolio, revealing yellowed pages covered in Jeremiah's precise handwriting. "These coordinates and references, we've confirmed they identify the locations of 6 other Pioneer Circle preservation sites across the country. 2 have already been located based on the information we provided." Thomas studied the carefully drawn map with red markers indicating locations stretching from Pennsylvania to California. "Other collections like ours? Similar in purpose, but different in focus," Dr. Harper explained, her academic enthusiasm evident. "A site in Wisconsin specialized in dairy innovation and sustainable livestock practices. Another in California preserved irrigation and water conservation technologies. Each location was selected to protect a specific category of agricultural innovation that the Pioneer Circle believed would be needed by future generations." This revelation expanded Thomas's understanding of his great-grandfather's vision. Jeremiah hadn't acted alone, but as part of a nationwide network of forward-thinking individuals who recognized that agricultural knowledge worth preserving might be lost in the rush toward industrialization. "Has there been any word from the other landowners?" Thomas asked, thinking about how the discovery had upended his own family's circumstances. The Wisconsin site was found on property still owned by descendants of the original Pioneer Circle member, Dr. Harper confirmed. "They're as surprised as you were. The California location is now part of a state university agricultural research station. They're excavating as we speak." The scale of coordination required to establish these preservation sites a century ago, all while maintaining such careful secrecy, spoke to the determination of Jeremiah and his colleagues. They had created a distributed archive of agricultural innovation, ensuring that even if one site was compromised, others would maintain their legacy of alternative approaches to farming. As they walked back toward the silo, Thomas noticed a university van arriving, carrying Dr. Montgomery and a new team member she had recruited, Professor Alan Jenkins, an agricultural engineering historian from Cornell University who had written extensively about the post-WWI transformation of American farming. "They've completed the patent analysis," Dr. Harper explained as they approached the new arrivals. "The results are even more significant than we initially thought." Inside the converted barn space, Dr. Montgomery spread documents across a large table while Professor Jenkins connected his laptop to a projector. The images that appeared on the makeshift screen showed technical diagrams of various agricultural implements from the collection, alongside patent applications and modern equipment designs. "Mr. Caldwell," Dr. Montgomery began, her typically reserved demeanor animated by scholarly excitement, "your great-grandfather preserved more than just physical prototypes. The documentation proves that the Pioneer Circle innovations influenced modern agricultural development in ways previously unrecognized by historians. Professor Jenkins highlighted specific technical features from the preserved designs. These soil conservation principles weren't rediscovered in the 1960s as generally believed. They were directly derived from Pioneer Circle concepts that were quietly incorporated into mainstream equipment designs decades after their original creation. He advanced to the next slide, showing side-by-side comparisons of a harvesting mechanism from the Caldwell collection and a modern equivalent. The engineering lineage is unmistakable. Features originally developed by Pioneer Circle, members eventually found their way into commercial equipment, though without attribution to the original inventors. Thomas studied the images, seeing the clear connections between his great-grandfather's preserved innovations and modern farming equipment he had used throughout his life. Are you saying these designs were appropriated? Not exactly. Stolen, Dr. Montgomery clarified, but selectively incorporated over decades. As original patents expired or Pioneer Circle members passed away, their innovations were gradually absorbed into mainstream agricultural engineering, often presented as new developments rather than refinements of existing concepts. Professor Jenkins nodded in agreement. What makes your great-grandfather's preservation efforts so remarkable is that he documented this process. The collection doesn't just contain the original innovations. It traces how they were systematically marginalized, then later partially incorporated into industrial agriculture when profitable to do so. This revelation added layers of historical significance to the collection beyond its obvious value as preserved artifacts. The Pioneer Circle hadn't just created alternative agricultural technologies. They had documented the process by which independent innovation was sidelined in favor of corporate consolidation, creating an unprecedented historical record of agricultural development. Martha entered, accompanied by Daniel and Robert Torres, the forensic accountant. Their expressions suggested additional significant developments. The Museum Coalition has presented their formal acquisition proposal, Martha announced, handing Thomas a substantial document folder. Daniel and Mr. Torres have reviewed the terms. Thomas opened the folder to find a comprehensive proposal from a consortium of major agricultural and technology museums, offering to acquire the collection while ensuring it remained intact for public education and research. The financial terms were substantial, more than enough to secure the farm's future for generations and establish a foundation for ongoing research into sustainable farming practices. They're not just offering to purchase the collection, Daniel explained, pointing to specific sections of the proposal. They want to establish the Jeremiah Caldwell Center for Agricultural Innovation here on our property, preserving both the collection and its original location as an integrated historical site. Torres, the accountant, highlighted the financial structure. The proposal includes immediate acquisition funds to resolve your bank situation, plus an endowment to maintain the center and support ongoing research into sustainable farming practices. The farm would remain in Caldwell family ownership while hosting the center on a portion of the property. This approach would preserve both the family's connection to the land and Jeremiah's vision of agricultural innovation focused on sustainability and small farm viability. The museum consortium would gain a unique historical collection of international significance, while the Caldwell family would secure their farm's future and honor their great-grandfather's legacy. There's more, Martha added, her expression both proud and slightly overwhelmed. Rebecca called from Baltimore. After reviewing the Pioneer Circle documentation, she's received approval from her research institute to establish a practical application program based on the collection's sustainable farming principles. testing whether these century-old approaches might help address modern agricultural challenges. The convergence of historical preservation and future-focused research seemed fitting, exactly what Jeremiah might have hoped for when he carefully concealed these innovations beneath the family's silo a century earlier. As Thomas considered these developments, Sandra Collins from the security team approached with an urgent update. "We've detected unusual activity around the property perimeter," she reported quietly. "3 vehicles have made repeated passes along the county road, and our sensors picked up movement in the western woodlot last night." Dr. Harper's expression grew concerned. "Has there been any direct approach to the silo?" "Not yet," Collins confirmed, "but the pattern suggests surveillance, possibly preparation for something more direct. We've increased security accordingly and alerted the county sheriff as a precaution." The implied threat added urgency to their decisions about the collection's future. With news of the discovery spreading through academic circles and the museum community, the risk of attempted theft or unauthorized access was growing. The collection's extraordinary value, both historically and financially, made it a potential target for those who might prioritize profit over preservation. "There's another factor to consider," Dr. Harper added. "Harrington has been making inquiries about potential legal challenges to your ownership of the collection. Our researchers have uncovered connections between his foundation and several agricultural conglomerates, including Keystone's parent company. They appear to be exploring whether corporate descendants of original equipment manufacturers might claim rights to these innovations." Thomas felt a surge of protective determination. His great-grandfather had deliberately preserved these artifacts to prevent them from being controlled by the very corporate interests now attempting to claim them. The careful documentation Jeremiah maintained, showing how these innovations had been systematically sidelined to prevent competition with standardized industrial approaches, now served as evidence against such claims. "How quickly can we finalize the museum agreement?" Thomas asked, his decision crystallizing in the face of these pressures. "The consortium representatives are prepared to execute the agreement immediately," Torres confirmed. "They understand the urgency given the security, concerns, and potential legal challenges." Thomas looked to Martha, whose nod conveyed her agreement with the direction he was considering. Daniel similarly indicated his support. The decision would commit their family to a new relationship with the land, one that honored both their agricultural heritage and Jeremiah's vision of innovation, focused on sustainability rather than merely scale and standardization. "Let's proceed with the museum proposal," Thomas decided. "It preserves the collection intact, keeps it connected to its original location, and secures the farm's future. It feels like what Jeremiah would have wanted." The team moved quickly to implement this decision, contacting the museum consortium representatives who had been standing by in anticipation. Within hours, preliminary agreements were signed, initiating the formal process of establishing the Jeremiah Caldwell Center for Agricultural Innovation. An advance payment from the acquisition fund was wired to address the bank's immediate demands, removing the threat of foreclosure that had loomed over the farm. Security around the silo increased as the formal documentation proceeded, with additional personnel from the National Agricultural History Museum joining the protection detail. Their presence proved warranted when shortly after midnight, the perimeter sensors detected multiple intruders approaching the silo from the direction of the western woodlot. The security team's response was swift and coordinated, surrounding the intruders before they reached the structure. When county sheriff's deputies arrived minutes later, they found 3 men in custody, professional thieves with specialized equipment clearly intended for breaking into the silo's hidden chamber. Subsequent investigation revealed connections to Harrington's organization, though carefully obscured through multiple contractors to maintain plausible deniability. The attempted theft accelerated the final arrangements with the museum consortium. By the following afternoon, armored transport vehicles arrived to relocate the most vulnerable artifacts to secure facilities for conservation and digitization, while structural engineers began planning the silo's transformation into a proper exhibition and research space. Each item was meticulously documented before moving, ensuring the collection's integrity remained intact despite temporary relocation of some components. As Thomas watched the careful handling of his great-grandfather's legacy, he found himself standing beside Professor Jenkins, whose expertise in agricultural history provided valuable perspective. "Your great-grandfather was remarkably prescient," the professor observed. "These innovations weren't just advanced for their time. Many of them anticipated challenges we're only now confronting seriously: soil depletion, water conservation, reduced chemical dependence. The Pioneer Circle was addressing sustainability concerns a century before they became mainstream priorities." Thomas nodded, thinking about how Jeremiah's foresight extended beyond the innovations themselves to the decision to preserve them for future generations. He built this silo to last, to protect something he believed would be needed someday. And he was right, Jenkins confirmed. Modern agriculture is at a crossroads, recognizing the limitations of purely industrial approaches. The path not taken a century ago, the one your great-grandfather preserved, may offer solutions to challenges we're facing today. This conversation crystallized something Thomas had been feeling throughout this extraordinary process: a sense of connection across generations, of participating in something that transcended the immediate concerns of bank loans and farm operations. Jeremiah had preserved these innovations not just as historical curiosities, but as practical alternatives that might someday be needed when the limitations of industrial agriculture became apparent. 1 month after the initial discovery, the formal establishment of the Jeremiah Caldwell Center for Agricultural Innovation was commemorated with a modest ceremony attended by representatives from the Museum Consortium, university researchers, and the Caldwell family. The weathered brick silo, now structurally reinforced and carefully modified to provide appropriate exhibition space, stood at the center of what would become an integrated research and education facility. The center would house the most significant pieces from Jeremiah's collection, while others would rotate through major agricultural museums nationally, spreading awareness of the Pioneer Circle's vision and innovations. The underground chamber itself was preserved as Jeremiah had designed it, now accessible to researchers and special tours, but maintaining its original character as a testament to one man's determination to preserve alternative agricultural approaches. Rebecca had returned from Baltimore to help establish the practical research program that would test Pioneer Circle innovations against modern agricultural challenges. Her background in sustainable agriculture made her the ideal liaison between historical preservation and contemporary application, bridging the century that separated Jeremiah's preservation efforts from current farming practices. "We're already finding applications for several of the soil management techniques," she explained to visitors during the opening ceremony. The Pioneer Circle's approach to integrating mechanical and biological systems offers promising alternatives to chemical-intensive methods, particularly for small and medium-sized farms. Daniel, applying his financial background in unexpected ways, had taken responsibility for managing the endowment established through the acquisition agreement. The funds would ensure ongoing maintenance of the collection while supporting scholarships for students studying sustainable agricultural approaches, creating educational opportunities that extended Jeremiah's legacy into future generations. As evening approached and the visitors departed, Thomas found himself alone beside the silo, watching as the setting sun painted its weathered bricks with golden light. Martha joined him, slipping her hand into his as they contemplated the structure that had stood watch over their farm for a century, silently protecting a legacy neither of them had imagined until a few short weeks ago. "Do you think Jeremiah knew?" Martha asked softly, "that it would be our generation that found what he preserved?" Thomas considered this question, thinking about the careful planning his great-grandfather had invested in creating the hidden chamber and preserving its contents. "I think he hoped someone would find it when it was needed, when agriculture had reached a point where these alternatives could make a difference again." The timing did seem remarkably appropriate. After decades of industrial agricultural development, the limitations and consequences of that approach had become increasingly apparent. Soil degradation, water pollution, reduced biodiversity, and the economic marginalization of family farms, these challenges made the Pioneer Circle's alternative vision suddenly relevant again, not as historical curiosity, but as practical inspiration for future development. "The farm stays in the family," Martha observed, watching as lights automatically illuminated the silo's entrance at dusk, part of the new security system protecting its precious contents. "Just as it has for 4 generations. But now it's something more as well." Thomas nodded, feeling both the weight and the privilege of stewarding not just land, but a vision that connected past to future. The financial security provided by the museum acquisition meant they could maintain their connection to farming while supporting the center's educational mission. The Caldwell family wouldn't just be preserving history, they would be active participants in exploring how historical innovations might inform agricultural futures. The following morning brought the first group of university students to tour the newly established center, agricultural engineering majors eager to study the Pioneer Circle innovations and their potential applications to contemporary challenges. Thomas watched as Rebecca led them through the exhibition space, explaining the historical context of each artifact while connecting it to current agricultural practices. "These aren't just historical curiosities," she told the students, gesturing toward a soil analysis system that had been carefully restored to working condition. "They represent alternative approaches to agricultural development, paths not taken a century ago that might offer solutions to challenges we're facing today." The students moved throughout the space with evident fascination, studying the innovations Jeremiah had preserved and the documentation that traced how they had been systematically marginalized in favor of industrial approaches. Many took detailed notes or captured images for further study, recognizing the practical value these historical designs might hold for contemporary applications. Outside the silo, additional students were working with Daniel in the demonstration field, where Pioneer Circle techniques were being tested against conventional methods. The side-by-side comparison plots would provide practical data on how these century-old approaches performed in addressing modern agricultural challenges, from soil health to water conservation to reduced chemical dependence. Dr. Harper approached as Thomas observed these activities, her expression reflecting satisfaction at seeing the collection's transition from hidden treasure to active educational resource. "Your great-grandfather would be proud," she said quietly. "This is exactly what the Pioneer Circle hoped for, that these innovations would eventually find their audience when agriculture was ready to reconsider its development path." Thomas nodded, watching as a young student carefully examined one of the mechanical components from the collection, asking questions about its design principles and potential modern applications. "It feels like we're completing something Jeremiah started, bringing these ideas back into the conversation about agriculture's future. That's precisely what makes this collection so extraordinary." Dr. Harper agreed. Most historical artifacts preserve what was. These preserve what might have been, and perhaps what still could be. The Pioneer Circle wasn't just looking backward. They were looking forward, preserving alternatives for a future they believed would eventually need them. As the morning progressed, a familiar truck appeared on the farm's driveway. Franklin Wilson, their longtime neighbor whose family had farmed adjacent land for generations. Thomas walked over to greet him, curious about his reaction to the transformation that had occurred on the Caldwell property. "Quite a change from last month," Franklin observed, nodding toward the activity around the silo and the university. "Vans parked nearby. More than I could have imagined," Thomas acknowledged. "Turns out the old silo was hiding more than just memories." Franklin studied the structure thoughtfully, his weathered face reflecting decades of farming experience. "Oh, your great-grandfather was always different from other farmers, always experimenting, always looking ahead. Folks used to talk about how he'd try things nobody else would consider, especially when it came to taking care of the soil. Makes sense he'd leave something like this behind. This connection to local memory, the community's recollection of Jeremiah as an innovator, even beyond what his family had known, added another dimension to Thomas's understanding of his great-grandfather's legacy. The preservation effort hadn't been an isolated act, but part of a lifetime commitment to agricultural improvement focused on sustainability rather than merely scale. "We're still farming," Thomas assured his neighbor, knowing that continued agricultural production had been a concern for many in the community when news of the discovery spread. "Just adding something new alongside the traditional operation." Franklin nodded with evident approval. "Good land deserves to stay in production, and maybe some of these old ideas your great-grandfather saved might help folks like us keep our farms going for another generation." This practical perspective captured something essential about Jeremiah's vision and the Pioneer Circle's purpose. They hadn't preserved these innovations merely as historical artifacts, but as practical alternatives that might someday help family farms survive in an increasingly consolidated agricultural landscape. A century later, that vision was finding new relevance as farmers globally sought sustainable approaches that balanced productivity with environmental stewardship. As autumn deepened toward winter, the Caldwell Farm settled into a new rhythm, balancing traditional agricultural operations with the educational and research activities of the newly established center. The brick silo that had stood as a silent sentinel for generations now hummed with purpose, sharing its long-kept secrets with students, researchers, and farmers seeking alternatives to conventional approaches. The legal challenges Harrington had threatened never materialized in force. The meticulous documentation Jeremiah had maintained, combined with clear provenance and the Pioneer Circle's careful intellectual property agreements, established unambiguous ownership that withstood preliminary legal scrutiny. When evidence emerged connecting Harrington to the attempted theft, his public reputation suffered enough that pursuing claims against the collection became untenable. Keystone agricultural enterprises, facing unexpected public scrutiny regarding their historical connection to the suppression of innovative farming techniques, withdrew their acquisition pressure on the Caldwell property. Instead, in a surprising development, they established a sustainability research grant program in partnership with the center, perhaps recognizing that associating with the Pioneer Circle's legacy offered better public relations than continuing to oppose it. The bank's foreclosure threat evaporated with the financial security provided by the museum acquisition agreement. The Caldwell Farm, which had stood at the precipice of loss just months earlier, now had resources not just to continue operations, but to implement some of the very sustainable farming approaches Jeremiah had helped preserve. Thomas often found himself standing beside the silo at day's end, watching as researchers and students departed and the structure's security systems activated for the night. The weathered brick cylinder that had been part of his landscape since childhood now represented something far beyond its original purpose. Not just a container for grain, but a vessel that had carried his great-grandfather's vision across a century to find new relevance in a changed agricultural world. In these quiet moments, Thomas felt a profound connection to Jeremiah, not just as ancestor, but as fellow steward of both land and vision. The hidden chamber beneath the silo had preserved more than artifacts. It had protected an approach to agriculture that prioritized sustainability and independence when market forces pushed toward consolidation and standardization. A century later, as those same priorities regained recognition, Jeremiah's preserved legacy offered not just historical insight but practical guidance for agriculture's future. Martha often joined him in these evening reflections, both of them contemplating how dramatically their circumstances had changed in just a few short months. From the brink of losing the family farm to becoming custodians of a nationally significant historical collection, the transformation seemed almost as implausible as finding a hidden chamber beneath a century-old silo. "I wonder if he knew," Martha mused one evening as they watched the sun setting behind the structure. "If Jeremiah somehow knew it would be you who found what he preserved, his great-grandson, facing the very challenges his innovations were designed to address." Thomas considered this possibility, thinking about the careful design that had kept the chamber hidden yet ultimately discoverable. "I think he hoped someone would find it when the time was right, when agriculture needed to remember these alternatives he helped preserve." And the timing did seem remarkably appropriate. After a century of agricultural industrialization, the limitations of that singular approach had become increasingly apparent. Soil degradation, water quality concerns, climate challenges, and the economic marginalization of family farms all pointed toward the need for alternative approaches, precisely what Jeremiah and the Pioneer Circle had preserved beneath that unassuming brick silo on a modest Pennsylvania farm. As darkness fell and the silo's subtle security lighting activated, Thomas and Martha turned toward the farmhouse, where lights glowed warmly in the kitchen window. Rebecca and Daniel were inside with Dr. Harper and several researchers reviewing plans for expanding the demonstration fields where Pioneer Circle techniques were being tested against modern challenges. The future they were creating together would balance respect for the past with innovation for tomorrow, precisely the approach Jeremiah had embodied a century earlier when he carefully preserved these alternative visions of agricultural development. The humble brick silo that had kept its secret for generations now stood as a bridge between past wisdom and future possibility, connecting Jeremiah's preserved legacy to the continuing story of American agriculture and the Caldwell families. A place within it. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.